order. And first, just go through roll call with the committee members.
Lisa Bobadilla, City of San Ramon, SWAT.
John Cunningham, Contra Costa County.
Jeremy Locurico, City of Walnut Creek, Transpac.
Tim Tucker Martinez.
Lori Reese Brown, City of Richmond.
Yvette Ortiz, City of El Cerrito and WICTAC.
Barbara Hawkins, City of San Pablo.
Dave Vaughton with MTC.
Jerry Fay with Contra Costa County.
Steve Kersavan, City of Brentwood.
Eric Hughes, City of Pleasant Hill, Transpac.
Did staff want to introduce themselves? Okay, later. All right, that's fine. Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. All right, at this point in the meeting, we're going to, it's an opportunity for public comment on any items not on the agenda. Do we have any public speakers? Okay, seeing none, I'll move to item C, approval of summary of actions. Do I have any comments or questions from the committee members? Any motions?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, well,
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Approved. Moving on to the consent calendar. Any questions or comments on the consent calendar? Do I have any motions?
I'll make a move to approve.
Okay. Okay. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now moving on to item 5 on the regular agenda, project monitoring, upcoming obligation deadlines. And we have a staff report. Hi.
Yes, good afternoon. My name's Walt Allen. I work for Parsons as a consulting with CCTA staff. And I prepared these items. So I just want to emphasize, that we do this on a regular basis to make the agencies, local agencies, aware of what's going on and any funding deadlines that are coming up. So that's really, the step is that for those agencies that have those projects. I especially want to emphasize the federal aid projects that are really available through OBAG. These are projects that were funded, were identified in the 2012 to 2015 cycle. So we've gotten through a couple of cycles now, and in fact, there were 2 projects delivered in 2013, 16 projects delivered in 2014, and there are 13 projects scheduled to be delivered in 2015. So if you go through look at that table for 2015, it shows the status update of all the different agencies and when they submitted their projects according to their milestones. So everybody, almost everyone, got their E76 submitted by February 2nd, so that was really good. It's really good to get those E76s in to Caltrans local assistance, because really that ensures that you will be able to receive your money. That's the question. Those that are late, there are agencies that are late, or maybe they completed their E76 and didn't have their right-of-way certificate completed. That actually, puts your funding a little bit at risk, because you might be past the May 1st deadline. May 1st is when that unused obligational authority gets released to other regions that on a first-come, first-served basis. So I just want to, make everybody aware of that. I'm sure you know that already. And I just want to also emphasize that for this next cycle, for the 2016 cycle, which is also in your packet as page 5-6, many of those projects are projects that were moved over from the 2015 cycle. So really you have a situation where you're going to have to deliver projects, and that Caltrans and MTC, really MTC has moved that deadline up. In other words, this year for the 2015 projects, it was February 1st, and now for the 2016 projects, it's going to be November 1st of this year. So really, here we are in February, in just 9 months, we're going to have those requests for authorizations submitted. So if you haven't arranged to get your field review ready, then now is the time to do that, because we don't have a lot of extra time. They're actually 3 months shorter for this cycle. So I just want to thank you and ask you if you have any questions.
Any questions from the committee? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 6, review of draft final 2014 countywide transportation plan update.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, board members. I'm Martin Engelman. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Planning at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and we're here this afternoon to present to you the draft final countywide transportation plan. You may recall we released the draft back in early August, and we've gone through an extensive public outreach process in September and October. We've gotten a lot of comments. We have 34 comment letters on the draft, and we've now responded to all of them. I think what we put in your packet was the executive summary and track changes, but you also may be able to see on the web the full volumes 1 and 3. We posted those as part of the TCC packet. I don't know how many people opened up the files. Anybody? You all did? Okay. No hands means you all did. Great. And then there are also five new action plans up there from West, Central, East, La Miranda, and Tri-Valley. You do have a handout, and that is some last-minute changes from Central County to add some ferry service actions to the Central County Action Plan. We also have a one-word change in the Tri-Valley Action Plan that came up at the SWAT meeting, and Lisa, we have to talk about how we manage that change, but we have to change the word will to would in the Tri-Valley document. So we're headed towards approval. We also have on the website the draft response to comments on the CTP itself. So for every letter, we've crafted a response, and we hope you'll take a look at that. None of that was printed, trying to save paper here, but it is up on the site. So today, Brad Beck and Matt Kelly will walk you through the changes that we've made to the plan.
I will kick it off. Thank you, everyone, for being here to listen to us. Just note on page 6.2, there's a short summary of the different changes that we've made, the main ones. One, we've added a new section on our role, the authority's role, and on the importance of maintaining the transportation system. We wanted to increase the emphasis on maintenance. We revised estimates of project and program costs. They're large numbers. We've expanded the discussion of technological advances that we see on the horizon, especially connected vehicles, automated vehicles, which is the new term of art, and their potential impact on travel. And you'll hear something about that from Jack Hall later under item 10. We included a new summary of the outreach process, since in the draft we hadn't done that process, couldn't include it. And we included substantive changes to the strategies and the implementation task, and a revised list of projects, both removing and adding, moving ones that were either no longer supported or completed, and adding ones that various agencies wanted added. And I will go through the changes to the strategies and the implementation tasks in a little more detail, and then Matt will talk a bit about the projects that were added and the ones that were deleted. Overall, one of the things we did in the strategies in response to the comments we received was either to expand the list of components of the transportation system and naming more of them, or by subsuming them all into the overall the transportation system rubric. So under strategy 1, which is support the efficient, safe, and reliable movement of people and goods using all available travel modes, we changed existing highways and arterial roads to the transportation system in the first strategy.
Brad, could you tell us what page you're on?
This is actually in the CTP itself,
Okay.
not in the executive summary. In one of the others, we did add a new strategy under supporting the efficient, safe, and reliable movement of people and goods, and that's defining and closing gaps in the countywide and regional bikeway network, including gaps in Class 1 and major off-street paths. There were a couple of other ones where we, again, added, changed highway and arterial to transportation system. We changed one of the strategies to read, identify new strategies to improve, instead of say freight movement, we changed it to the efficiency and safety of goods movement being the more up-to-date term, and expanding the areas where we're looking at not just freeways and rail lines, but also waterways and arterial streets, including local truck routes. But we also added a phrase that we wanted to encourage goods movement, but also while supporting economic development, improving air quality, and mitigating impacts on local communities. Because we've got a number of comments that goods movement does have impacts on various communities, rail yards, for example, or truck traffic through neighborhoods. Under the second goal, which is managing growth, we added a phrase on to help achieve regional, state, and federal objectives as part of the strategy to participate in cooperative land use and transportation planning, and we added that phrase, and transportation. We changed one of the strategies that started out require local jurisdictions. I'm sure you're interested in any strategy that starts that way. We had added a task called track development, and I'll talk about that under implementation tasks later. The planning committee wanted that stricken, and the authority agreed last night to that change. We did change it a little bit to say evaluate and report on new developments and the impacts of local land use decision on the transportation system, and that's in keeping with the growth management program. We also asked that jurisdictions identify transit options as well as other capital and supportive operational improvements and multimodal improvements, which were already in the strategy. Under the strategy linking transportation investments, there was some wordsmithing, but we also added that we would support new developments that support transportation efficiency, economic vitality, and also reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And we used or, so it could be any one or all three of those aspects and objectives. We added two new strategies. One is to work with state, regional, and local agencies to develop cost-effective programs and approaches to mitigate the impacts of growth and conserve resources. We had a number of comments from agencies, especially what you might call advocacy agencies about that, and also to incorporate measures into the authority's policies and procedures to help minimize or eliminate the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's also one of our implementation tasks. Last night, under Goal 3, expanding alternatives to the single occupant vehicle, the authority made one change. The first strategy was about expanding transit services, and we had added some additional transit services, BART station access programs, and ride sharing. And the authority last night wanted us to add the phrase "where appropriate." The Planning Commission had made a change on the next strategy, which was to say support rather than link transportation investments that lead to increased capacity, coordination, and integration of public transit services. That was a change that Commissioner Abelson suggested. Under supporting a coordinated system of transit, we added the phrase affordable to that strategy. Under strategy to support congestion and parking pricing programs, TDM, and then we spelled out additional technological innovations, which was something that another comment that we got. We did some additional wordsmithing under 4, maintaining the transportation system, reordering them. We did add a new strategy, which is to facilitate meeting new requirements such as complete streets and stormwater quality management, which may affect maintenance and rehabilitation projects. And those are all the changes to the strategies. What we did under the implementation task is we've revised them somewhat, and we've added a couple of them. One is to prepare a development monitoring dashboard to track development trends. That's something that ABAG has promised to do. It's part of the PDA planning process that they're involved in. It's something that I'm sure if you're on the planning side of things in your agency, you've gotten some requests from ABAG in the past, and you will continue to get requests on development trends and activity in your jurisdiction, and that's related to that. We had a strategy about preparing studies to address specific transportation issues, and we had a number of things in there, such as the transit options study, high capacity transit options study in West County, and also the one on 680. But we added another one, and the one was at the request of Hercules. They want to look at a study around I-80, John Muir Parkway, and Sycamore Drive, and how to deal with pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle movement through that area. And we also had a request from East Bay Regional Park to support a study of trail street intersections along the Iron Horse Trail in Central and San Ramon Valley. We also had a task to participate in the countywide goods movement study. There's one going on now, and then we are part of that MPC and Alameda County are working on. There's some wordsmithing throughout here to change some of the terminology to be more correct. One of the tasks is to respond to state and federal legislative mandates, and there are a number of them, including AB 32 and SB 335, to look at our growth management program in light of the changes from SB 743 and the use of vehicle miles traveled instead of level of service and how that might affect our technical procedures. We're going to participate in implementing mobility management programs. We'd be working with County Connection and other transit providers on that. Let's see. I mentioned SB 743. We'd look at that in terms of the MTSOs the next time around on the updating action plans and what effect that might have on those. We added a new strategy about supporting ways to lower transit costs, and I mentioned the addition of the word affordable transit options in the strategies, and this is related to that change. And that we would be working with the RTPC's MTC and the transit operators and trying to find ways of increasing affordable options and affordable transit access. BART wanted us to add a strategy on improving BART station access with new technologies. They would be the responsible agency, and we would support that, and they will be coming out to jurisdictions that you have, the ones that you have BART stations. So you'll probably be hearing from them about that activity. We added 3 new ones on maintaining partnerships, looking into how we might collaborate with regional agencies on a regional advanced mitigation planning program, what's called RAMP. Once we know a little more about that, we'll be discussing it with you. Also, a task to expand involvement with ride-sharing services and paratransit, and support for housing and infrastructure improvements in PDAs, and that would be related to the cap-and-trade funds for the affordable housing and sustainable community strategies, and supporting agencies that want to get access to that funding and to use the funding to support the goals of that program. So those are the primary changes to both the strategies and the implementation task. And if there aren't any questions, I'll turn it over to Matt.
I have a question.
Sure.
Actually, I have 2. Could you talk a little bit about, you said there was something about change in local jurisdiction tracking?
There had been in the draft plan let me go to it. There was a strategy that said, started out, require local jurisdictions to, 1, track development. And that came out of the PDA planning requirements that authority is involved in through MTC and ABAG's PDA planning programs. And one of the things that we're supposed to do is track development. We took that out because ABAG has decided or agreed to or was encouraged to take over that tracking of development, because we're supposed to keep track of how much development is occurring in each jurisdiction, and also within the PDAs if you have a PDA. And they've decided since that they would do that, and so we don't have to have it as a requirement of local jurisdictions.
Thank you. The second question, you said there's a new strategy to facilitate complete streets and stormwater. I didn't understand the connection on those. So.
Well, they could be connected depending on the project, but those are things that are requirements that all you as staff to jurisdictions have to address. Stormwater quality, there are the national pollution discharge requirements that you're under. There's the new Complete Street Act requirements that you're going to have to address. Maybe not at the same time, but if there may be ways that the authority through our offices can help you address. So that would be the task.
So by facilitate, would it mean in terms of funding, in terms of design, in terms of?
It could be any of those things. I mean, it could be that we would change our guidelines on how we could use Measure J money, or it could be that we provide best practices advice to jurisdictions throughout the county on addressing some of these issues. It doesn't have to be just complete streets or stormwater quality. It could be other things.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So when are we going to receive a copy of these changes that were made? And we,
If you go online and download the plan,
so they're there now?
they're now, and
Okay.
it shows up as
Yeah.
red line strikeout. So you'll be able to see the changes since the draft in August.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? I just had a question for clarification. You were mentioning some projects or studies that you were adding to the document, like the implementation tasks. How are those different than the project listings in Volume 3? I think.
Well, it could be that some of those studies to address specific transportation issues are included in our comprehensive transportation project list. Most of them will be studies, like the high-capacity transit study in West County and along 680. Or some future ones like the study in Hercules or a study of trail intersections along the Iron Horse Trail. Many of the projects that are listed in Volume 3 are specific improvements. There may be new projects that come out of those studies. We have set aside, as Matt will mention, some funding in West County for some project that would come out of that West County study. It's unspecified yet because the study is not complete. West County hasn't, and BART, and hasn't seen the recommendations since the study hasn't even started yet. So, but we've set aside some funding as a project, which fairly undefined at the moment.
Anybody else? Okay. Are you looking for an action here? No. Okay. Oh, and then Matt's moving. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Volume 3, the CTPL, or the Comprehensive Transportation Project Listing. It's got somewhere upwards of 1,500 projects in there. What we did between the draft and final is really focus on bringing it up to date, working with our project sponsors to make sure projects, status, total cost, description, were all up to date. We also did a lot of reorganization, making sure that projects were in the projects category, programs were in the programs category, because they get their money from different places. So we wanted to keep those two pots of money separate. And I don't believe we did that in 2009, so that was a first this time around. So basically, starting with the comments we received on the draft countywide plan, there were a lot out of the, I think, 34 comment letters. Several of those letters had comments about specific projects, so we pulled those comments out of there, got those into the CTPL, and then starting in December, we reached out to the project sponsors, most of you all, and asked for even more updates, because some of the comments we got from all the different commenters were that, hey, I drive through the Caldecott and I know the fourth bore is done and your document says it's under construction, is your document up to date? And I will say that the Caldecott fourth bore still will be in the final project list, just because there is still work being done on the super elevation and the landscaping. So it is still an active project, just for FYI. So basically, we received comments on 500 different projects. So there were edits made to at least 500 projects, or edits made to 500 projects, and it could be more than one part of any one project: cost, description, schedule, things like that. 100 projects were removed from the list that we were told were completed. So projects like that included the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge seismic retrofit. That was about $300 million. The BART transit-oriented development infrastructure at a few different stations, including here across the street, is complete. Some of the segments of the Highway 4 widening were completed. So all those were removed. So that's, right there, that's almost, that's several $100 million removed. But we also added 150 new projects and programs back to the list. We also, a couple of new ones include AC Transit added a BRT upgrade on San Pablo Avenue in West County. We added, as Brad mentioned, a $500 million line item for the West County High Capacity Transit project. And basically the line item says construct recommendations from the West County High Capacity Transit Study. So it doesn't name BART, it doesn't name an alignment, it says construct what comes out of this, the recommendation that comes out of the study. We added a line item for connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle infrastructure. And we also updated all the operating costs for our transit providers, which was upwards of $1 billion there. So we changed 40 projects from being active in one way or another to no longer supported. No longer supported is kind of our catchphrase for projects that need to be removed, whether the project sponsor says we're no longer in support of that project. And one big project that's no longer supported is the State Route 4 Phillips Lane interchange. That is no longer being supported by Antioch, so that's $45 million off the books. But most of those projects that are no longer supported were duplicate projects we found, where they were entered twice, once maybe 5 years ago and once 2 months ago. So we found those and removed those. So the draft plan had $11.6 billion in projects. The final has $11.9 billion in projects and about 60 more projects. On the program side, the draft had $14.5 billion in programs and now has $17 billion in programs, so an increase of $3.5 billion. That was mostly getting things consistent with what's in Plan Bay Area, a lot of the big programmatic categories. We had some artifacts from previous RTPs, and we made sure that we reflected the latest RTP information. So that's kind of the highlights from the Volume 3. It's online, PDF'd as Volume 3, but there's also an Excel file up there that you can filter to look at your own projects or look at projects by type, any way you want to look at them. So please feel free to take a look. Yeah, yeah, some of you may be used to our ctplupdate.com or .net website where you actually go in and enter your new projects or edit them. That isn't where you go to look for the latest information that's in the plan. We'll open that up for you eventually, but it doesn't contain the latest information. The latest information right now is on the TCC webpage, the links there. So any questions about projects? And I'd like to thank the majority of you here helped get the list into shape over the last couple months. So I'd like to thank all of those of you who helped with that task.
Thank you. It sounds monumental, what you just went through.
It feels that way.
Yeah, Barbara?
I noticed that in your programs, you have a delta of about 200,000 more, and in your projects, and then in your programs, there's a 2.5 million increase. Is it the color of money that move things around? Would you get more money? So I'm just wondering, and it looked like the monies for the proposed project costs, the 200,000 went up in the construction side for arterials and bicycles, and in the programs went up for transit and for bus.
Yeah, we moved around some programmatic categories that were in. There was an AC Transit operating and vehicle replacement programmatic category that was in the project side. So, and that was about maybe $1.5 billion that we moved from one to the other. The BART line item from Plan Bay Area went up a lot, so that brought the programs up. The project side it did take some hits from things like that, but mostly it was just projects being completed and new projects coming online that, over the last 3 months it went kind of like this. But it was surprising that it actually came out It's actually, I think, 300 million above what it started out as in the draft.
And so did you get it, because the program costs went up about 2.5 million.
Billion.
Billion, sorry.
Yeah.
So that, was that new money, or is that just before it used to be under the project costs?
A little of both. So some, like that AC Transit program moved from projects to
Right.
programs, and then as part of Plan Bay Area, some of the funding pots, like for BART and others, were increased from the last RTP. So
And also, those are costs, they're not revenues.
Thank you.
The difference between the two
Yeah.
is fairly substantial.
Yeah, okay.
And
Thank you.
the revenues are outlined in the plan, and you'll see there's a big difference.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Do we have any members of the public who would like to comment? Okay. So you're actually looking for us to recommend this to move forward to the board.
Yes, and authority.
Do I have any motions?
I'm sorry, I do have one question. So the schedule that was included, I believe it was in last month's packet, the longer schedule in terms of the renewal, if any discussions of the renewal are taking place, is that schedule current on the website? It was attached at one point to this process.
You're talking about, hi, Martin Engelman again. You're talking about the bar chart, the Gantt chart?
Yes.
Schedule, yes, it's still current. We're going for a March adoption of the countywide plan. And then we will kick off development of an expenditure plan during calendar year 2015.
Okay, so that's the schedule that is still current, right? No change, okay, very good, thank you.
You still looking for a motion? I'll move to approve as it's been stipulated and submitted to us.
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. So we're moving on to item 7, presentation of the I-680 Corridor System Management Plan, operations modeling results.
Good afternoon. My name is Tarek Hatata. I'm with System Metrics Group, and we were the consultant chosen by Caltrans and CCTA and others to conduct this study. I'm going to give you a very brief presentation. I think you have the executive summary in the materials that you got. Give you a really quick overview and then give you some of the new elements that were in this corridor system management plan compared to maybe the first generation that some of you have been familiar with that came after Prop 1B, where they were mandated by the California Transportation Commission. MTC also developed them under the auspices of the Freeway Performance Improvement, FPI, projects. Before I tell you about the actual project, give you a feel for the partnership. I see many of you here, or at least several of you here, that we've gone out and reached out to. We had a study working group, Caltrans, and Eric Alm, our project manager, is right behind me. Matt was very involved from CCTA. MTC was involved. Mike Kearns was on there. And then the folks from UC Berkeley were involved throughout with modeling and other technical assistance. Then we have a technical advisory committee that had all the members from the study working group and all corridor jurisdictions. We had transit agency. We even had Alameda CTC, given that the 680 links to Alameda. And we had active transportation representatives. What we tried to involve our stakeholders with throughout was confirming how the corridor currently operates and the performance. And two areas that they told us, that you told us, or your representatives told us that you really are interested in besides the evaluation of the corridor performance is, are the improvements planned for the 680 going to relieve some of the diversion that's currently occurring on your local arterials to bypass some of the problem areas on the 680? And if yes, by how much? And then, given that ramp metering seems to be coming to most of the Bay Area, one of the concerns was, where are we likely going to have issues with ramp metering in terms of backups on the ramps that may affect local traffic? So we'll give you highlights of those two in a minute. But of course, Caltrans decided, in addition to that, we want to add a few wrinkles to the study. One is the smart mobility performance, a smart mobility framework, and we were encouraged to use some performance measures that are not traditionally used, and we'll show you some of those. I'm glad I heard about complete streets. We did conduct a complete streets analysis and identified some bike and pedestrian opportunities along the corridor. And then we also were asked to use a new macro simulation model being developed by UC Berkeley called Tools for Operations Planning, or TOPL. And the reason for that is that the traditional macro simulation model used by both District 4 and MTC historically is called FreeQ. Many of you may have heard of it, and that's no longer being supported because the people who developed it, Dolph May and company, have retired, and there is no support for them, so they're developing the next generation macro simulation tool. So with these wrinkles, I'll give you a few highlights. Under the Smart Mobility Framework, we, and actually Will McCullough from our staff here is the one who developed that, did a place types analysis for all the jurisdictions around the 680. And special use areas, urban centers, compact communities, and so forth, to inform us as we looked at the corridor and the likely performance moving forward. We also, as I mentioned earlier, looked at non-traditional performance measures. We looked at mode share, at reliability, at emissions, user costs, greenhouse gas emissions, and I heard that theme earlier. These two charts that are shown here, I think this is the mode share, and it's still dominated by drive alone, although there are other modes as well. And the one here to the right looks a little complicated, but it's really, the black is the average travel time depending on the time of day, the x-axis is time of day, and the y-axis is travel time. And then that red is, if you want to make sure, if you want to be 95% sure you're going to get to your destination on time, how much more time should you schedule, given the incidents and accidents and weather issues that occur on the 680? And as you see, it's probably as big as the actual travel time. So the red here is the 95th percentile, and the black is the average travel time. And the details you can see in a very, very large report, and some of that is also in your executive summary. This is just northbound, by the way, the reliability. The complete streets analysis we conducted, the corridor was broken down into segments, and we looked at both sides of the freeway and looked at factors such how easy is it to cross from one side to the other, what is the pavement condition, do we have walkways, is there enough access to for bikes on those streets, and literally went and did field observations on all of those. And we identified a number of opportunities for improvement. Some would call them deficiencies that may be addressable in the future, but we were encouraged to call them opportunities for improvement. Again, if you want to see the complete list of improvements, they are on the main report, but some of that is also in the executive summary. So, one important part of really trying to get the most out of your system is first to understand what issues do you have on the freeway. The freeway is still carrying a big chunk of the traffic, and if you want to do modeling, you have to be able to identify where the bottlenecks are and the causes of the bottlenecks. So this table here shows you the summary that we developed by looking at a lot of data and going to the field and doing field observations. We even took videos to better understand how the bottleneck forms, and then went with talked to our partners and their experiences, and we agreed to those. Those have been modified several times until we reached consensus, and a few times we had to go back to verify some of the feedback we got. The way it looks from a technical perspective here, this is, for instance, the afternoon peak, the PM bottlenecks northbound. And the red color is very low speeds, and the green colors is more or less free flow. If you look here, there are three major bottlenecks. The travel is going from top to bottom. You have a Crow Canyon bottleneck, some of you may be familiar with. There is an El Cerro, El Pintado bottleneck, and a big one, North Main Lawrence. So as we do modeling, if we don't get these right to start with, then any improvement we try to analyze is likely to be wrong too. So if we identify this bottleneck a little downstream or a little upstream, then we can do an improvement at Crow Canyon and it wouldn't show the impact. So I can tell you it took us about a year to get the modeling to reasonably replicate current conditions on the freeway. Then we worked with the stakeholders to identify scenarios to evaluate. And I want to maybe take a minute. This is a little different than what you have seen in other corridor studies. In most corridor studies I've been involved with or heard about, you look for alternatives. So you do the transit-heavy alternative or the freeway-heavy alternative or some kind of hybrid alternative, an HOV alternative. Those are not against each other. Scenarios here build on each other. We really weren't trying to come up with major new capital projects. We were trying to see the projects that you have in your pipeline or that you're thinking about, if they are phased as currently thought, how will they perform and what else would you need in the future? So scenario one, for instance, we looked at everything you already have programmed or planned and fully funded. They included auxiliary lanes, arterial widening, and as you know, the extension of the express lanes north to Livorno Road. As we were talking with our stakeholders, and some of you were in those discussions, we were asked to first test the auxiliary lane alone to see how it performs before we put the express lane and the arterial widening, kind of a proof of concept for the model. Then scenario two was supposed to be additional operational strategies that can be done reasonably easy and are also in the pipeline and in the near future. But again, the stakeholders wanted to see ramp metering by itself so they can identify what should we be worried about if we do ramp metering. And then scenario 2B looked at additional improvement like direct access ramps and the other part of the express lanes. And then we started looking at more of your longer-term scenarios. And scenario 4 was from one of your reasonably older studies that looked at auxiliary lanes along the corridor. And scenario 5, if you want to look at bike and ped, we looked at if you implement your full county-wide bicycle plan, how would that impact the freeway and how would that impact the system? So the way we evaluated these scenarios was, one, using your model, the CCTA model. That's a travel demand model that includes mode shift, includes diversion. It's much more comprehensive than a macro simulation model. But what it does not do, what it cannot do is tell you how it influences bottlenecks, and it cannot tell you how ramp metering is going to perform. It cannot tell you how it will perform if you improve incident management. If you are able to reduce the length of time it takes to clear an incident, it cannot tell you that. So we complemented the comprehensive analysis using that Topple tool that I told you. We calibrated to existing bottlenecks, and then we evaluated operational strategies such as ramp metering and incident management in addition to the others. So let me give you some snapshots of the results. If you put in the projects that we show you in the scenarios, the yellow and green show you where arterials and or freeways are going to improve in terms of congestion and vehicle hours of delay. And you see most of the arterials are going to improve. And the reason for that is that as the freeway conditions themselves improve, there will be less incentive to divert and go around the freeway and get around the bottlenecks. You find a few locations with red, that's where things get worse. And the primary reason they get worse is that now people, instead of diverting around the freeway, go to the first ramp that they can get to get on the freeway. But overall, congestion overall will decrease, and diversion will decrease much more significantly. The scenario results are shown here in terms of delay, but maybe more importantly, if I go down to the next slide, we conducted a benefit cost analysis, and as you know, that's recently. Benefit cost analysis is now being required by lots of funding agencies. Prop 1B originally required it, but even the ARA funds that came from the feds required a benefit cost analysis. So here we do it by scenario, and scenario 1, because it's mainly operational improvements, low cost, has a really large benefit cost ratio. The lowest one that we had was the express lane direct access ramps and the first phase of the SR4 interchange improvement. And one of the reasons that is that the interchange improvement is so expensive, and we only counting the benefits on the 680. We're not counting the benefits on the 4. And so this way, all your projects have a positive benefit cost ratio. We believe that the ones you have programmed to be implemented in the near future are going to be very beneficial. And then in the longer term, these auxiliary lanes that we got from a previous CCTA study should be seriously considered, especially if the cost is still only $95 million. Overall, I believe the total benefit cost of all these combined is still above 4, which I think is higher than most corridor plans, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was higher than the previous combined MTC RTP. So then we looked at bottlenecks. Let's look at now the detailed traffic analysis. And if you do the express lanes and the arterial widening and get the diversion that the travel demand model expected, you see the Crow Canyon bottleneck pretty much disappears. The El Cerro, El Pintado bottleneck gets much smaller compared to what we show you, but because the flow is improved now, the North Main Lawrence becomes a bigger bottleneck. So that's the kind of... Sure.
The arterial widening, what arterial widening project is that referring to?
I will have to go back up. I don't know. I think
It's Buskirk right up here and a
Okay,
section
so
of
it's
Contra Costa
not-
Boulevard. Yeah.
Okay, so it improves
This is
it
only
improves-
the freeway here.
right,
So these 3 projects
combined, okay.
do get rid of the Crow Canyon bottleneck.
So the aux lane is the I-680 aux lane in South
And that's
South
the one
County.
you already implemented.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. What's the diversion?
The diversion is once the freeway conditions improve, the CCTA model predicts that more people will use the freeway as opposed to diverting around the freeway, for instance, to get around the Crow Canyon or the El Cerro bottleneck.
So those 3 combined, aux lane, the diversion, and the arterial widening at Buskirk will improve
Will improve
northbound
traffic
680
flow.
from Crow Canyon?
Yes, we'll get rid of the bottleneck at Crow Canyon. Like here's where the aux lane is,
Right.
and here is where the Crow Canyon bottleneck used to be. And here's where the express lane is, and the combination of the aux lane, express lane, and the diversion related to it will get rid of the Crow Canyon and reduce the El Pintado bottleneck. But what happens is because we have now faster flow, this is not being metered here anymore. There's no metering here at all, so they get to North Main Lawrence faster, and that bottleneck gets bigger. But net, it's still an improvement. Now, for the ramp metering, those of you who are interested in the ramp metering results, unless you figure a way to expand the following ones, the modeling suggests you're going to have backups that flow to the streets. Okay? So we ran that by by MTC and Caltrans. They said, don't worry, before we would ever think of implementing ramp metering, we'd do a ramp metering implementation study, and we'd identify those. Now, we don't necessarily believe you always have to add a mixed flow lane. You can also add an HOV lane on the on-ramp instead of a mixed flow lane, but you have to increase the capacity of the on-ramp, because what's going on is once you meter a ramp, the maximum throughput you can get through a ramp is 900 vehicles per hour. Some ramps today already carry 1,300 per hour. So imagine if you have 400 cars backing up in 1 hour, what it would do to the rest of them. Now, if you have 2 lanes, now all of a sudden your capacity goes back to 1,800, so the 1,200 can go no problem without the backup. So I think there's quite a bit of work still. This was not a pure ramp metering study. So when MTC suggested that an implementation study would identify that, we were glad, because we didn't want to come here and surprise anybody. But those are potential problem areas that you need to look at. And our final report will also identify some areas where you will need to look at as demand increases by 2025, 2030, where additional ones will need to be looked at. So, overall conclusion, your plans currently, short-term, will really help the 680. I think one of the problems you're still going to have on the 680, even with these short-term plans, is accidents and collisions and the delays related to non-recurrent delay related to these collisions and incidents. And I would encourage you to look at ways and means to work with District 4 to figure out how to improve incident management. There are strategies being developed as we speak. On several corridors, the governor has funded some integrated corridor management initiatives in the south and the north, and maybe MTC would do something similar. Ramp expansion will be needed, and the ramp backups will have to be monitored. I can imagine that if this is not done correctly and backups happen in a significant way, that ramp metering would not be very popular in Contra Costa. And I think ramp metering by itself will already reduce your accidents, by the way. Now, those were short-term. If you go to long-term, that congestion will come back. As we know, demand increases and development occurs and congestion keeps going. So at that time, you really should consider these additional auxiliary lanes that we talked about earlier. And I'm listing them here. I'm not going to read them all. But those are not really expansion projects. Those are aux lanes to help with the ramp flows and the merging of the ramps. And as always, and this is one of my own personal pet peeves, so I don't represent Caltrans in this regard, we really should look at projects when they're delivered, whether they're performing the way they're supposed to perform. We actually looked at your aux lane, and it did. It really improved things. However, I don't see before and after studies quite as often as I think those of us who are in the profession would like to see, so we can learn which projects may have exceeded our expectations and which ones may or may not have been lemons, so we don't do them again. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from committee members? Lisa?
This may be a question for Martin or Matt. Do we have a status on the ramp metering that's been implemented, I think, in Central and East County?
Jack might be able to speak to that. He was the project manager on that.
We don't have that after schedule. Is that what your question?
Yes, because ramp metering started in East County, what, 2-3 years ago?
No, we don't have that, but we are working on to get that done.
I think that would be helpful because, you know, there's been some reluctance in the south part of the county for ramp metering, so I think it would be helpful when you do have that info.
I think you can, if I may, you can also ask MTC. They conducted a before and after on the 101 by San Mateo. That may also be useful, although it's a different profile of traffic and so forth.
Well, they have, through the Tri-Valley, Dublin, Pleasanton, Livermore, they've implemented ramp metering. They've done some results, and they have found that there are, you know, the traffic flow has improved along the 580 corridor. But the real question, and we asked this with our colleagues in Pleasanton and Dublin, what's happening on the local arterial roadways?
Maybe when that report is available, we can bring that to this committee.
Okay.
Would there be funding made available if there are impacts on the local roads to mitigate the impacts of the ramp metering?
If the backups are as bad as some of our projections were without expanding, I don't think mitigation will do it. I think that they will ask for the meters to be turned off until the meters are expanded. And that's why Caltrans, and again, I don't speak for how they will do it, but their process is that they go, and if they figure out that the flow, incoming flow is larger than the ability of the metered ramp to allow it, they either expand the ramp or they don't meter it at all.
Okay, so then I have a follow-up to that question then. So then do the local jurisdictions, Pittsburgh, Antioch, do they have an agreement in place with Caltrans for ramp metering then? There's no...
So this is Jack Hall, ITS CV Program Manager for CCTA. That policy's been changed. And so it was an MTC policy actually, and it's been proven that ramp metering works. And so now, I mean, so I don't know if I would, ramp metering works, and so there's no longer an agreement. And I think that was a D4 requirement, Caltrans District 4. Other places in the state, they just turn on the ramp meters.
Maybe I need to clarify something. Once you expand the ramps, we tell you, ramp metering has great benefits. I'm just telling you that the modeling shows that it will back up on those ramps if they don't get expanded. Once they get expanded, you actually improve flow significantly on the 680.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to add that as part of the I-80 ICM project, the Integrated Corridor Mobility Project, all the local agencies and Caltrans, CCTA, I think, entered into a MOU regarding implementation of ramp metering and making sure, at least that there was a committee that would get together and discuss any problems with ramp metering and the appropriate resolution.
And for full disclosure, we are the before and after study firm working for Parsons actually on the I-80 ICM, so we may be coming back here to tell you what we found.
A quick question. So what's the next steps after we receive the report? What happens with the recommendations? How does it get implemented? And assuming there's going to be, I don't know if it's wrapping into somehow Measure J improvements or it's at a higher state level, but I'd be interested to find out who's going to be paying for these improvements.
So a lot of the improvements we tested are already programmed or in your plan. The additional ones, such as the auxiliary lanes, I don't think they are fully funded yet, and you're updating the study, I think?
Yeah, those auxiliary, all the projects that were mentioned, including those auxiliary lanes, are in the plan. It's just a matter of getting funding, and absent a reauthorization or extension of Measure J, it would go through the normal process where projects kind of come up from the subregions. But I would imagine during the expenditure plan development process, these improvements would be taken into account.
So has it ever been envisioned to have a regional traffic impact fee from the local on the network? I'm curious because I've heard rumblings about this before, and as cities develop and redevelop their planned development areas, which are strategically located near these corridors, I'm just wondering what kind of the long-range impact financially could be on local jurisdictions or development.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say about that. But I mean, it does speak, to the concept that these improvements, some are funded, some are unfunded.
All right, well, I guess our friends from East County are not going to say anything. Martin Engelman, CCTA. You're asking about a regional fee in Central County?
Yeah.
I know.
Have you talked to Julie Pierce and David Duran about this?
No, well,
You should go talk to him about this.
I'm not proposing one. I'm asking, is this something that is envisioned that would be assessed by Caltrans? Okay.
Well, I'll just say, hopefully I can say this right. I've been here a long time. I've been here 25 years this May, and in 1993, as part of the growth management program, we proposed a countywide uniform transportation and mitigation fee. And after that went out to the public, we got feedback from the regional committees that said we can support that, but we want to do it by region. So each sub-area, West, Central, East, and SWAT, ended up coming up with their own regional mitigation program. And so in Central County, you have a regional mitigation program. And in West, Central, and West, East, and SWAT, they actually have a regional mitigation fee.
I'm aware of that program. It's just that with these improvements that fall within Caltrans jurisdiction, it's slightly different from intra-jurisdictional mitigation.
Yeah, I think these auxiliary lanes, if they have the beneficial impact that we've been told they have, that would be something to consider for the Measure J renewal if they perform well.
Okay, thank you. I guess we're moving on to item.
I had one more
Lisa.
question.
Okay,
Sorry, just one more
okay.
follow-up. So I should probably know this, Matt, but I don't recall seeing auxiliary lane project from Alcosta to Bollinger. So I'm just wondering if it's just assumed that at some point we would have a project?
Yeah, I think the plan, I forget if it was the investment study, it was one of those plans from about 15 years ago that, or 10 or 15 years ago, that looked at potential improvements, and it basically looked at filling in auxiliary lanes where there were none planned.
But there's no project today. I mean, there's no project from Alcosta to Bollinger for Aux Lane. So if we were to take into consideration what we need to do in the future to get to where we want to be in terms of traffic flow, that would be a project that we may need to consider as part of the renewal effort.
Right, and the way it was analyzed as part of the CSMP was in conjunction with all the other ones north of Danville.
Right.
So whether that one, I'm not sure where all the bang came from, which location, but you'd probably want to analyze that one.
Well, we have existing auxiliary lanes in San Ramon from Bollinger to Crow.
Yeah, but those that group of auxiliary lanes are all in the CTPL, so they do exist in the plan, but they haven't been moved forward at any point in time.
I think we're done with that item, so we're going to move on to item 8, presentation of Metropolitan Transportation Commission's Vital Signs Initiative.
All right, good afternoon. Dave Vaughton with MTC's planning section. I'm here to give you a little preview of a project that we launched the first phase of just last month, and it's called Vital Signs. Vital Signs is our new performance monitoring initiative for the region. It's framed around an interactive website, and I'll give you a little tour of that this afternoon. So as I mentioned, it's a performance monitoring portal designed to support Plan Bay Area implementation. One of the interesting things we did with the project is we allow you to see not only what's happening at the regional level, but zoom into a county, a city, a neighborhood, or an individual freeway segment. The project seeks to track progress towards transportation, land use, economic, and environmental goals, and we'll be updating this data on an ongoing basis going forward. We do have a website where all this data is being stored, so instead of a traditional paper report, it's all on the web, so it's at vitalsigns.mtc.ca.gov. And we did a lot of work. We looked at, we're going to have up to 40 different issue areas and once the website is fully live this June. And all of the data that we collected and cleaned for the effort is all now available. So there's data for all of your cities on each of these different measures that I'm going to highlight today. And so you can check that out in the data center. We'll be launching the remaining issue areas, which are, we tried to go beyond transportation, so we're looking at land use, economic, environmental issues. Those will be coming out this spring and this summer. So for each of the issues that we studied, looked at 3 different types of analyses. A historical trend analysis, where we went back as far as possible, sometimes back to the 1960s, to look at how different performance measures have changed in our region. We also looked at individual cities, individual counties, and reported on their performance, and then did a metro comparison where we compare ourselves against other major metro areas. They're highlighted on this slide, which shows the 9 other most populated metropolitan areas in the country. And it's a pretty nice range of metro areas from New York and Chicago to Miami and Dallas. So the 14 different issues that were released last month are highlighted with these icons. So you have commute mode share, commute time, commute flows, interregional traffic, congestion, both in terms of hours and mileage, freeway travel time reliability, transit ridership, transit cost effectiveness, VMT, state of good repair for local roads, highways, bridges, and transit. That's all up on the web right now. In the next couple months, we'll be releasing the land use data, population, jobs, construction, and greenfield development. And then there's some more measures coming out subsequently on economic issues, environmental issues. So we're really trying to get at the whole broad spectrum of concerns and issues in the region. What I want to do today are 2 things. One, highlight our key findings from Phase 1A, and then show you the website. Hopefully you can go check it out and see if this data might be beneficial for your city. So first of all, one of our big findings was that commute mode shares and commute times have remained very stable over the past few decades. This chart here shows the region's commute mode shares since 1960. And it is a little hard to read, but pretty much you can see that this red zone here, that's auto, that has stayed at about 77 to 80% for quite a long time period. Transit mode share between about 10 and 11% since 1960, when transit ridership was actually much higher in the region. This chart here shows the commute mode share for transit by itself, historically, by county. As you can see, San Francisco's transit commute mode share is actually down from peaks in 1960 and 1980. You can see Contra Costa down here as the 3rd highest county for transit mode share in the region. Commute times, we hear a lot about how traffic is the worst it's ever been, but actually in terms of the time you spend getting to and from work door to door is been very, very stable. As you can see, we're still below the year 2000 peak for commute times, which was 29 minutes. Today we're at about 27 minutes. And so there's been a pretty narrow range. Second finding was related to commute flows. We looked at the exchange between the various counties in the region. San Francisco and Santa Clara were flagged as importing the largest number of workers. Here you can see the share of residents that live and work in the same county, and you can see Contra Costa's here towards the back of the pack with just 61% of people who both live and work in Contra Costa County. Contra Costa also comes out as an outlier on this chart as well. This is the net number of commuters for each county in the region. You can see that San Francisco imports about 150,000 people per day, and Santa Clara about 100,000 people per day, and Contra Costa is down here exporting about 100,000 people each day, so by far the highest number of any county in the region. Another finding was related to transit congestion and how that traffic congestion and how that relates to transit demand. So we did publish this top 10 list, which highlights some of the most congested corridors in the region. Of note on this slide, you can see that most of them are actually in the East Bay. In fact, the number one most congested location was in San Francisco for the first time on record. This shows the number of minutes that people are actually experiencing of freeway traffic congestion. Now, both Caltrans and MTC consider congestion to be speeds below 35 miles per hour. So the average person spends about 2.6, 2.7 minutes of a day in actual congested delay. The latest data on record on total delay was about 7 minutes per day of being delayed by freeway congestion. And there's a correlation between the transit ridership and the congestion trends that we've seen. So you can see here how Muni and BART are approximately 70% of all transit ridership in the region. That makes sense given that those are serving some of the most congested places in the Bay Area. Finding number 4 is related to reliability and the connection to congestion. We have been flagged as the number 3 for actual delay from congestion of these top 10 metro areas. So you can see here, we're actually quite a bit better than LA. We have half as much congestion as LA does per person, and pretty similar to Houston. And where you can find places with a lot less congestion, Philadelphia and Miami, their congestion's significantly below, at least less than half of what we see here. But when it comes to reliability, we use a measure called the buffer time index, and actually our freeway travel times are the most reliable of any major metro area, which is pretty remarkable, and it's by a very large degree. So if you compare Washington, D.C. and the Bay Area, our freeways are 3 times as reliable as Washington, D.C. Moving on to state of good repair, we did see some pretty good news related to bridges and highway condition, but not so much on the local road front. So this is a chart showing the pavement condition index for the Bay Area. You can see here it's stagnated at 66 for a number of years. But when we turn our attention to the highways and the bridges, you can see, according to Caltrans District 4, the highway condition actually is the best point on record since year 2000. So this is the share of highway lane miles that are in distressed conditions. They're actually quite significantly below past performance. On the bridge side, this is the share of bridges weighted by their deck area that are considered structurally deficient. And there was certainly a big spike in bridges that were flagged as structurally deficient here in the late 90s. And today we've brought it down by about half of what it was at this peak. And this speaks to some of the seismic improvements on overpasses and bridges in the Bay Area. The final finding is related to transit ridership. So there's some mixed news here. The total ridership has increased somewhat, but per capita ridership has declined. This chart shows the total ridership of all the transit systems in the Bay Area. And you can, over this time period since the Fed started keeping records on this in 1991, there's been a 3% increase in transit riderships between 91 and 2012, which was the last year of data available. Now, but when we adjust that for population, unfortunately, there is a decline in transit ridership per capita. So the average resident back in 1991 took 79 trips by transit. Today, it's around 68. That's a 14% decline. This is partially due to what's occurring on specific transit systems. Here you can see the growth adjusted for population on BART and Caltrain have gone up. That's spurring a lot of the capacity problems we hear so much about. But on the bus operators, these are the 5 of the largest bus operators in the region, there's been quite a decline ranging between about 10% for Muni up to almost 40% in San Mateo County. And when we compare ourselves to other metro areas, we're not doing particularly well. New York, Miami, and Los Angeles all grew their transit ridership faster than population. We're only outperforming Dallas, Houston, and Atlanta in terms of transit ridership, and ours has, as I said, declined when adjusted for population.
I have a question about that. So did you also look at investments, transit investments, and if that's related to those regions having put more funding into transit versus our, okay.
So we did look at some of the reasons for why these metro areas are performing well, and it's different for each one. You're probably thinking of Los Angeles when you're talking about major money going towards transit expansion, and that's probably the cause there. Interestingly, New York, was mainly due to state of good repair. You know, they haven't been building much transit, just maintaining it better. And Miami was able to generate this growth primarily due to land use. And they actually have not grown their transit service, and yet they saw great strides in transit ridership because they densified, particularly in the urban core. So that's a quick overview of some of the findings. I just want to give you a sense of what you can get on the website. First of all, there's a homepage. You can quickly get to any of these issue areas to start exploring how your community performs. And this interactive grid here will allow you to filter by the various issue areas that are going to become available. Right now, it's the 14 transportation measures. Here's some examples of the types of interactive maps you can use. So for example, on the left, this is a commute mode choice map. So as you zoom in on the map, it gives you more and more detailed data. So you can zoom in all the way to your neighborhood, click on it, and then get the modal share breakdown for that neighborhood. You can also get it by city and the county. And you just choose the mode you're interested in. It will give you this nice heat map. On the right side here, this is a PCI map. So you can actually zoom into any city in the region and see the pavement condition on every street. So you just keep on zooming in and just hover over the street, and gives you this nice update of what's the condition of that street compared to the rest of the city. We also have customized charts for a lot of these issues. So here's one for transit, like I was talking about. You can turn on and off layers. So for example, I highlighted the 7 biggest operators, but let's say you wanted to look at some of the operators in Contra Costa County. You can make a customized chart. Click this little icon up here on the right, and it exports it right to PowerPoint, so you can include that in, say, a presentation. Also, at the same time, there's some other interactive maps. You can choose the drop-down, select your city, and it'll make a customized graph for you right away. And all this data is available on our data center, so you can just go and download that if you really want to delve into the details. So that's a quick overview of our Vital Signs project. We're going to be launching the rest of the data in the spring and the summer. So thanks.
Quick question, going back.
Okay. Yeah. It's all bridges and overpasses. Yeah.
I have a question. So how much of this takes into account unemployment or employment in certain areas? Because I know that some people will, transit will probably increase for some individuals who probably have to commute. And then for those who are unemployed, they don't commute anywhere. So how much of that was taken into consideration?
So in our economy release, which we're working on right now, there's a lot of data on jobs, job breakdown, unemployment, all that sort of thing. So that's all coming out. We are highlighting how the recession trends do affect measures like transit ridership. And interestingly, the transit ridership actually peaks after the end of the recession. It's almost like a lag effect for people choosing to take transit. And then as congestion improves, they start driving a bit more.
Okay, very good presentation. And my last question is, so when will that data be out in terms of the information on jobs and related economies?
All that will be coming out this spring.
This spring, okay, thank you.
You'd mentioned that there was a 7 minutes of delay per day. When I look at my own commute, it doesn't calibrate. So how do you verify that? How have you tested it to make sure that your model is really true?
So none of the data is from models. That's it's a performance monitoring effort, so it's all based off of observed data. And in this case, the congestion data comes from INRIX, which is a data provider that is mainly based off of cell phone data, GPS data, fleet data. It gets a sense of what the speeds are on all the freeways in the region. So that's where the data for the freeway delay is coming from. I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of folks who don't experience any freeway delay. Maybe they work at off hours where they don't have to commute and delay. Not everyone has a 9-to-5 job, so that's important to consider. Not all of the congestion occurs on freeways. We know that, and this measure is specific to freeways. So certainly there's a lot of variability in the number of minutes that people experience the delay, but the average commuter experiences something in that ballpark.
Thank you for the presentation, very thorough. Just a question. A lot of the information here is basically historical data that reflects how trends, people are mode share, are using different mode shares. Yeah. Are we looking at making that into future predictions? would be the first question. And secondarily, what do we say to the official that looks at this information and says, gosh, we've made all of these millions and millions of dollars of investment into bike infrastructure, into transit infrastructure, and yet we don't see the percentages of those mode shares increasing.
Yeah.
Just wondering if you had any comments on that.
Both good questions. So your first question, sorry, refresh.
Projections.
Projections, yes. Okay. So this is kind of a complementary effort. When we do our long-range plans, we do lots and lots of projections using models. And now that the plan was completed, we thought it was really important to have a tracking system to see what's actually occurring on the ground. So as we start the Plan Area update, we're going to be doing a lot more forecasting with different scenarios, how they're performing against our performance targets, which are connected to these measures for vital signs. In terms of the lack of growth, I guess you could say, in some of the alternative modes like biking, walking, transit, we've thought a lot about this. I think a lot of the investments that have been made have created benefits, but at the same time, there's been this some challenges on the land use front, frankly, particularly as we look back into the 90s, into the 80s. There was a large amount of suburbanization in the region. Particularly the suburbanization of jobs is a really key concern, and that in our mind has generated challenges that have kind of counteracted maybe some of the benefits that have occurred from investments in non-auto modes. As the jobs have dispersed out of a bit from the traditional job centers that are well served by those modes, we see some kind of a lack of growth in the mode share. The other thing that's important is the Bay Area has changed a lot since 1960, and as more growth moved to the South Bay, where in general auto mode shares are higher, the gains that we see in the Central Bay Area, kind of San Francisco, Contra Costa, and Alameda counties, can be negated by that southward growth trend. So in particular, in the slides, there actually has been slight growth in some of those modes like transit, like walking and biking in Alameda and Contra Costa and to San Francisco to a certain extent in this time period, but that's been counteracted by other parts of the region. So.
Okay, Martin, you had a comment?
Thank you, David, for a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate it. Very interesting. So we saw a similar presentation from ABAG on this, and I can't remember her name, Cynthia Kroll. And she went back through the projections, starting from, I think, projections 90, and looked at how well did we do, and it turns out ABAG did very well on population, pretty good on housing, not so good on jobs, especially because of the economy. But I think it'd be really interesting to see how well MTC's model did as far as the projections, for example, for the 90 RTP or whatever it was, the 86, 88 RTPs, and how did the projections pan out in terms of the mode shift and the transit ridership? That'd be interesting to see as well.
I think that would be an interesting effort. Perhaps for our next annual cycle, we can take a look at that.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you, Dave. We're moving on to our last item, item number 9, approval of work scopes for the Priority Development Area Planning Grants.
Hi, this is Brad Beck again. I'll try to make this much shorter than the CDP. Thanks for the approbation, Tim. The authority was given $2.745 million from MTC to fund PDA planning grants, and we approved a process where we would approve the grants for local jurisdictions. We would contract with a couple of consultant teams, and then we would have these contract managers that would help us, and they would help first working with the jurisdictions to decide which team they want to work with, and then to decide and what the scope of work would be. And we've got that marriage between the consultants. All the jurisdictions have decided which consultant team they want to work with, and that's in your packet on page 9-2 and 9-3. And they've decided on a summary work scope, and those scopes will be included in a co-op between the authority, both the co-op between the authority and the sponsors, and in the contracts between the authority and the consultant teams. So you'll see the amounts. There's $2.716 million that were requested in the grants. And you can see that the four firms that are going to have funding, Arup has $1.15 million, $100,000 for Perkins and Will. That's for the Oakley project. Opticos has $816,650 for Ramey. Their project is the biggest project, which is the North Walnut Creek specific plan. And you'll note there's $29,000 left over, and we decided we would distribute that as a contingency to each of the consultant firms based on their share of the grant amount, so that Arup would get in at $12,300 for contingency. So what we're asking is that we've got everything worked out, and we're asking for your concurrence with this mixing and marriage between consultants and the sponsors.
Question. Okay, thank you for taking questions on this. So I'm looking at projects as it relates to the city of Richmond, and I don't see any. Is that why is that? Were we not involved in this process? Or?
The city didn't ask for
That
a grant.
is too bad.
You could have done it. You could have done it.
Huh? I mean,
we're not going to make you apply for a grant, but
right. I just don't know how we missed out on this opportunity.
Well, we got 10
we did
requests.
not have anyone, huh?
We had 10 requests. We had
2.7. So
We
that
approved all
information
of
was sent out to each of the cities in West County.
Well, throughout the county.
Throughout the county. So yeah, I'll get your card afterwards to kind of find out who that was sent to in the city of Richmond.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll think about who it was.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
It might have been, I think it was sent to Chad.
Chad.
Not just Chad, though.
Right.
And we did present it at the TCC at more than one meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? And you're looking for an action or recommendation to forward this
Yes,
to the
if you
board?
would.
Do you have a motion?
Yes, I'll move that the TCC recommends to the authority the work scope for the PDA grants.
Okay, all those in favor? Say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Brad. So I think there's another item, there's a couple more. Item 10.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jack Hall. I'm the ITS CV Program Manager for CCTA. I'm introducing Gomentum Station. It's CCTA's CV AV program around Gomentum Station. You probably know it as the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and it's located in Concord. This is where we'll lead and facilitate partnerships to accelerate the next generation of transportation technologies, connected vehicles, and autonomous vehicles. So our vision is to build a CV AV center where convergence, innovation, and commercialization of CV applications and AV technologies take place in the largest test bed in the world. And our overarching goal, I'll try to speed this up a little bit, is we want to create jobs, have efficient mobility, enhance safety, and create a healthier environment. So this is the Concord Naval Weapons Station. It's over 5,000 acres. We have a license to test on 2,100 acres. There's a 7-mile-long spine road where we can do testing for higher speed vehicles. This is one of the highlights of the area of the test bed is there's two 1,400-foot long tunnels that go underneath State Route 4, and this is ideal for testing sensors. When we take automobile manufacturers out there, they get really excited about this because of GPS and different testing technologies. Again, this is a Willow Pass Road. You go in underneath it. There's a lot of different geometrics out there for testing. Here you can see the roadway is cracked. We are going to do some repaving out there, but at the same time, a lot of roads out in the local area that are public roads are not in perfect condition, so this is good testing area. This base opened in 1942 and with World War II, and it ran all the way through the 2007 and the last Gulf War. They used trains to move munitions from the bunkers to the ships out in the bay, and so there's a lot of rail out there. Also, there's multiple parking lots where multiple users can test for self-parking and skid tests for OEMs. This is our CVAV program. The center circle is Gomentum Station. That's where we do our beta tests. And on the outside are various pilot projects that we have, such as State Route 4 ICM, which was just actually granted today. We got a notice from the US DOT that we received a planning grant. I-80 ICM, pedestrian projects, bicycle projects. Again, I'm going fairly quick. We call this City 5.0. Randy Wasaki, our executive director, he likes Hawaii 5.0, so we're calling it City 5.0. It's a smart city. It's basically a blank canvas that we would like to see as much technology put into this area as possible. On the dais, there's an invitation to a March 31st summit that we're going to be holding. So please, we'd be interested in having you come. Also, I'd like to introduce Karush Oliaya. He actually he put together our State Route 4 ICM planning grant, and which we just received notice that we were successful. And he is working on a connected vehicle pilot deployment grant, and he would like to just say a few words on that.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to appear before you this afternoon. And I will not be the one between you and your afternoon beer. So I'll be quick with my remarks and just wanted to thank you for the opportunity and announce that in preparation of a broad agency agreement that has just been put out not long ago by the US DOT Federal Highway Administration, we are at the direction of Randy and Jack preparing a proposal for the connected vehicle program. In doing so, we're going to be seeking your help as stakeholders, as participants. And I do know it's a late hour. I do know some folks have left. But we are going to be transparent on the whole process. We'll be sending out a survey monkey through Jack out to seek your opinions, ideas, needs, what have you, each jurisdiction. Because the proposal will be needs-based and needs-based only for it to have a chance to be successful. I'll stop with that and take any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay, Barbara.
I'm sorry, I just don't understand exactly what these autonomous vehicles are. I mean, are they driven by themselves? Are they different fuel types? Are they different, an electric versus, are they hybrid? Are they levitating? I don't know. What have you got?
Right, so we're working with, the plan is to have 3 to 5 automobile manufacturers, and these are self-driving cars, such as Google has been out on the site, and their director, I think he's the director of autonomous vehicles, he's asked me, does a driver need to be in the car? And the answer is no. And that's why this test facility is a nice place, because there's no public out there. It's guarded by the military. And so if something did go wrong, it's a nice place for it to happen. It's a beta test area, and then the plan is to move it out into the city streets. We've been working with Concord and Walnut Creek specifically the most, but we want to expand throughout the whole county. So, I mean, it is, and there's also connected vehicles. So, I mean, the difference, a connected vehicle, NHTSA just made a notice of, NHTSA, what did I say? You said NHTSA. Oh. NHTSA is the National Highway Safety Transport. And so, like NHTSA, for instance, one of their rulings was that all cars had to have seat belts. And so we all have seat belts in our cars now. And so this proposed ruling is all cars will be connected. And so then, like, say on a left turn assist, the cars will be able, like, if there's a long line of cars and a car can't get in to make a left turn, the connected vehicles will allow that to happen. So we feel you can't build your way out of transportation congestion now, and technology is the way to move forward. But really what the driver on this was really Assemblywoman Susan Bonilla asked our Executive Director, Randy Iwasaki, to bring jobs to the Concord Naval Weapons Station. So he went out there and said, hey, this is an ideal test bed, which it is. And so we want to bring jobs into Contra Costa.
So I had a question. So CCTA is the lead on this effort, and how is it being funded? Like, what's the program that is running this effort?
Right. So we have two tracks. This isn't a major project. It's right now our consultant is Stantec, who Karush works for, and there's no, they're not in a contract. They're just doing it. And so the government track the public track is the automobile manufacturers. We have different verticals, so we have insurance agencies, tier 1 suppliers, academia, and they fund what improvements needs to be done. So at the Concord Naval Weapons Station, some of those pictures that we showed, I mean, the roads are in pretty good shape, and you could test right now. However, sometimes you might want to put new pavement down, and so they're going to pay for that themselves. The other track is the governmental track, which is the CV pilot deployment that we're going to be submitting on, and it's due on like March 16th. So that'll be government funded, and it's a public-private partnership is what it is.
So government funded, which government?
US DOT.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think, any other questions? Well, thank you for presenting the item to us.
All right, thanks for staying.
And that adjourns our meeting for today. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for March 19th at 2:30 here. Thanks, everybody.